I turned the key like I had hundreds of times before. The weight of it in my palm still felt familiar solid grounding. The lock clicked open and I stepped inside with the tiffin pressed against my chest, the scent of warm lentils and cumin rising to meet me. For a moment, I pretended nothing had changed, that it was still my kitchen, still my walls, still the place where my daughter used to run barefoot down the hallway shouting, "Mom, dinner smells amazing." But the moment broke before I reached the living room. There was music, something electronic and pulsing, bright laughter, then silence too sudden. I turned the corner and found Isla perched on the edge of the armrest barefoot in a cream robe, her face taut. Kellen stood behind her holding a beer, blinking at me like I'd wandered into a room I didn't belong in. "You should text first," he said, adjusting his tone to sound casual. "Just so we know?" Isla didn't even stand. "We need a little privacy, Mom. That's all." I stood there, still holding the tiffin. The food was hot. The foil inside was steaming. I had woken early to make her favorite spinach dal and chapatis the way she liked it growing up soft and torn by hand. I swallowed and managed a small smile. "You're right," I said. Kellen nodded awkwardly, clearly relieved. Isla offered nothing else. I walked into the kitchen without being invited and set the tiffin down on the counter gently. The sound of it resting on granite felt louder than it should have. I didn't take off my coat. I noticed my old tea kettle was gone. A sleek, matte black one stood in its place. The fridge was lined with sparkling water, no sign of the ginger ale I used to keep for Isla when she had cramps. Every corner whispered unfamiliar. "I'll leave you to it," I said. Neither of them responded. I walked out the same door I came in through, the key still in my coat pocket, pressing against my palm, like it no longer fit. The next time I visited, I told myself I was only dropping off Isla's tax forms. No lingering, no tea. I just wanted to see if the hibiscus plant on the porch had survived the last frost. But once I stepped inside, I couldn't stop my eyes from scanning the living room. The wall facing the staircase used to be filled with photos. Isla at the science fair, her 5th birthday with cake smeared on her cheeks. A black and white photo of me and her father on our wedding day, framed in walnut. That was the memory wall. My late husband used to joke that it was the museum of our chaos. Now it was bare. Just smooth eggshell paint and a generic metal wall clock. I stared at it too long, hoping maybe they'd moved the frames elsewhere. When I asked Isla about it later, she just said, "We're simplifying the space." Like our life was clutter, like our history was aesthetic noise. The couch was new, angular gray, no blankets draped over the sides like I used to keep. Even the bookshelf had been rearranged. My copy of Interpreter of Maladies was gone. A row of self-help hardcovers had taken its place, all with white spines and minimalist fonts. The place looked like a catalog, clean and quiet, sterile. But what struck me most was the embroidery. I had stitched it years ago, 4 birds perched on a flowering branch. It had always hung above the entryway mirror. I remember Isla tracing the edge of the frame when she was little, asking which bird was her. Now the space was empty, not even a nail left behind. I didn't ask, because asking would have made it real. I stood in that entryway, my fingers brushing the smooth wall, and I understood something I hadn't let myself feel before. This wasn't my home anymore. Maybe it hadn't been for a while. I just hadn't been ready to admit it. I left the tax forms on the counter and slipped out quietly, not wanting to hear silence used as permission again. It started with a phone call. Isla's voice was tight, rehearsed. "Just until we get settled," she said. 6 months tops. Kellen's contract didn't renew and my remote job is still stabilizing. We just need a breather, Mom. Just somewhere we can think. I didn't hesitate. Of course I told her. Come home. I didn't call it my home. I called it home as if that meant the same thing. I packed a suitcase and moved in with Therese the next week. She had a guest room and a warm way of making space without making me feel like a guest. I told her it would be temporary. She laughed and said, "With family, it's never temporary." Before I left, I made sure everything was in order. I stocked the pantry, wrote out the Wi-Fi password on a sticky note and taped it to the fridge, refolded the linens in the hall closet. Even paid the next quarter's property taxes ahead of time. Isla hugged me in the doorway and whispered, "Thank you. I don't know what we'd do without you. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't ask for timelines in writing. I trusted her. Trusted that she knew what this house meant, that she would honor the space the same way I did." The day they moved in, I walked Isla through the quirks the front door sticks unless you lift the handle just right and the upstairs bathroom runs cold for a minute before the hot water kicks in. I showed Kellen where I kept the emergency flashlight, the spare batteries, the toolbox behind the washing machine. He nodded like it mattered. As I handed over the keys, something small and heavy passed from my hand to hers, not just metal but history. She said, "It already feels like home." I smiled then, but something in me hesitated. A flicker I ignored. I told myself it was pride. Later, I'd wonder if it was the sound of something beginning to slip. I had spent the whole morning in Teresa's kitchen, kneading the dough by hand, mixing potatoes with toasted cumin and crushed coriander. Isla always loved my samosas. When she was in school, I used to sneak one into her backpack before exams, her lucky charm, she called it. I wrapped them in foil, tucked them into the old steel tiffin, and added a small jar of mango chutney I'd made the night before. I didn't call ahead. I didn't think I needed to. When I opened the door, the music hit me first. Something upbeat and electronic, echoing too loud off the hardwood. I stepped inside, already feeling out of place. Isla didn't see me at first. She was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with 3 women I didn't recognize. Their fingers were smudged with pastels, paintbrushes, and hand wine glasses half full beside them. A canvas leaned against the ottoman blush and gold streaks with no shape, no meaning. When Isla looked up, the smile on her face vanished. "Mom," she said like a correction. Kellen appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "You could have texted," he said, half laughing. "We've got people over." I held up the tiffin. "I made samosas." "Thanks," Isla said, not moving to take it. "But please call next time. We've got our own rhythm now." The sentence was casual, but it landed with weight. I set the tiffin on the edge of the counter and took a step back. One of the women gave me a small, uncomfortable smile. Another reached for her wine. Isla didn't introduce me. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence wrap itself around me, and then nodded. "I won't stay," I said. "Enjoy your night." No one stopped me as I walked out. The door closed behind me with a soft latch, but it felt like something heavier had just been sealed shut. I closed the door behind me softly, careful not to make a sound. Not because I wanted to be polite, but because anything louder might have cracked something open inside me I couldn't hold together. I walked to the car, tiffinless, still carrying the scent of turmeric on my sleeves. That night, I lay on the edge of Teresa's guest bed, watching the ceiling blur in the dark. My mind kept circling the same fragments like a looped prayer. I couldn't stop saying the embroidery missing from the wall, the family photos replaced with abstract prints the time I'd come by and found the locks changed. Security upgrade, Isla had said offhand when I asked. Kellen read something about break-ins. No one had told me. I had to find out by standing on my own porch with a grocery bag and a key that didn't work. I remembered Mira, the woman at the wine and paint party, how she had looked past me, not through me, like I wasn't even part of the equation, like I was furniture someone hadn't moved out yet. And Isla, my Isla, not unkind, but edited, smoothed down into something distant. She had once clung to me after nightmares pressed her ear to my chest to hear my heartbeat. Now she asked me to call before stepping into the house I raised her in. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but the tears stayed locked somewhere deep. What I felt wasn't sharp. It was something heavier, slower, like standing in a room that used to be filled with sound and realizing no one is speaking your name anymore. Therese knocked once before poking her head in. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I'm fine," I lied. She didn't press. She just left the door slightly open behind her as if to remind me that not all doors need to be shut completely. The next morning, I opened the bottom drawer of my suitcase and pulled out the old red folder. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside were plastic sleeves filled with property tax receipts, warranty slips, a water bill from 2008. At the back was Martin Feldman's card, the realtor who helped us buy the house when Isla was still losing baby teeth. I ran my finger over the embossed lettering before dialing. Martin Feldman. "Hi," I said, steadying my voice. "This is Selena Arlo. You helped my husband and me buy the Maplewood house. 20 years ago." There was a pause. Then warmth. "Of course. That beautiful two-story near the bend, I remember. How are you, I'd like to sell." Another pause. "Are you sure I'm sure?" "No listing, no signs. Quiet sale. If you have a cash buyer, I'm ready." He didn't ask why. He must have heard the kind of quiet I was speaking through. That afternoon, I walked through photos I hadn't looked at in years. Isla's first steps on that carpet, her birthday party where the cake collapsed, the night my husband and I painted the kitchen in mismatched socks and laughed until our backs ached. I touched the edges of those moments like soft glass. I didn't feel regret, just a kind of earned stillness. I didn't tell Isla or Kellen or even Therese. Not yet. It wasn't secrecy. It was space. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to make a decision that didn't require anyone else's comfort. Martin called me the next Thursday. A retired couple local no mortgage moving closer to their daughter. They'd seen the place and made an offer that morning. I said yes without hesitation. There wasn't a single tremor in my hand when I signed the papers. Not one. I rang the bell for the first time in my life. It felt strange standing on that porch like a visitor. I wasn't holding a dish or mail they forgot to check or anything at all. Just my purse and a printed packet inside. Isla opened the door in a robe, her hair pinned back, eyes still puffy from sleep. She blinked. "Mom, is everything okay?" "The house is sold," I said. "The new owners move in next week. You'll need to be out by Friday." She stared at me. "What?" I stepped inside. Kellen was at the kitchen island in sweatpants mid-bite into a spoonful of cereal. He looked up confused. "Hey, Selena. Everything all right?" Isla turned to him, her voice sharper now. "She says she sold the house." He paused, spoon suspended mid-air. "Wait!" "What?" "It's done," I said, placing the papers on the counter. "All signed. You have 6 days to make arrangements." Kellen set the spoon down. "You didn't even tell us." "Why would you do that?" I met his eyes. "Do you mean like when you changed the locks without telling me? Or when Isla asked me to call before visiting my own home?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Isla stepped forward, defensive now. "We just needed time. You could have given us a warning." I nodded slowly. "And you could have given me respect, not as a guest, as your mother, as the person who gave you that key in the first place." Silence fell like a curtain, heavy and complete. I looked around once at the minimalist prints, the sterile color palette, the space that used to hold birthdays and storms and bedtime stories. My voice didn't shake. "You said this was temporary," I added. "I'm just honoring that." And then I turned steady and sure toward the door. The morning after I handed them the notice, I didn't wake up early. No tea waiting to be poured, no chores that needed doing. Just light slipping through Therese's sheer curtains and the scent of rosemary from her little windowsill plant. I lay still for a long time, letting the quiet stay quiet. We didn't talk much about it. Therese was never one for digging before someone was ready. She made space the way people do when they've known your silences longer than your stories. That week, she cleared out a corner of the guest room for my books, framed a picture of me and my husband, and placed it gently on the windowsill. The house sale closed smoothly. The couple moved in without questions, and I left behind a loaf of banana bread and a small card that said, "Welcome home." I didn't sign my name. Days stretched into weeks. I started walking in the mornings down to the same park where I used to push Isla in the swings. I found myself remembering things more vividly, her crooked front tooth, the way she used to fall asleep on my chest with one hand curled around my thumb. That version of her hadn't visited in years. 2 weeks after I left the house, my phone buzzed with a message. From Isla. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't realize how far things had gone." I stared at it for a long time. There were a dozen ways I could have answered. I thought of saying nothing, I thought of telling her it wasn't enough. But what finally came out was this: I miss who you used to be. I didn't send it to hurt her. I sent it because it was the most honest thing I had in me. She didn't respond. And that, too, became its own kind of answer. Therese didn't say anything when she placed the frame on the windowsill. It was the photo from our 22nd anniversary, me, in a deep green dress, my husband in a suit slightly too big for him, both of us laughing caught mid-breath. She wiped the glass once with her sleeve, then stepped back like it had always belonged there. That morning, I made lentil stew just for the two of us. No tiffin to fill, no clock to race. I stirred slowly, humming a tune I hadn't remembered in years. Therese chopped cilantro beside me, tossing the stems into the compost bin without needing to ask where anything was. There was a rhythm between us that required no translation. In the afternoons, I started journaling. Just a few lines each day at first. Not about Isla or the house or the ache that still surfaced some mornings before I opened my eyes. Just thoughts. Bits of myself I hadn't heard in a while. I wrote about the smell of rain on pavement, about my mother's hands, about the quiet kind of strength that doesn't always look like winning. One Thursday, I followed a flyer to the local library. A women's writing circle met there weekly, tucked in a back room with folding chairs and strong coffee. I listened for the first 2 meetings. Then, I read a piece of mine aloud, a story about a woman who outgrew the rooms she once built. When I finished, no one clapped. They just nodded, eyes soft. One woman said, "That felt like something I didn't know I needed to hear. I hadn't been waiting for approval, but something in me opened anyway." At home, I rearranged the guest room, made it mine, hung a soft blue curtain, left the window cracked even when it rained. The frame of me and my husband stayed by the light. It looked different here. Not like a memory, but a presence. A quiet anchor reminding me that some kinds of love never vanish even when everything else does. And for the first time in years, I stopped checking my phone to see if Isla had written back. I baked the banana bread early before the sun had finished rising. Overripe bananas, browned butter, and a handful of walnuts I toasted just the way my husband liked. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a moment I forgot what day it was. It felt like an ordinary morning. It felt like mine. I wrapped the loaf in parchment, tied it with string, and walked it down the street to the house. Not my house anymore. Just a house on Maplewood now, with new names on the deed and fresh curtains in the windows. I didn't ring the bell. I placed the bread on the porch beside the doormat and slipped a small card beneath it. Welcome home. No signature, no explanation. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence hold me, then turned and walked away. The sidewalk felt different under my shoes. I moved slower. Not heavy, just steady. Like a woman carrying her own name again. No tiffin in my hands. No waiting for permission. Just the sound of birds overhead and the distant hum of someone else's life beginning inside walls I no longer had to protect. Back at Therese's, I made tea and took it to the window. The frame still sat there catching light on the glass. My husband's smile unchanged. Mine too. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb and thought not of what I had lost, but what I had chosen. I had chosen to stop asking for space in a life I built. I had chosen silence over begging stillness, over resentment closure, over endless trying. And in that choosing, I found myself again. Later that week, I brought a story to the writing group. One about a woman who leaves a house not because she's pushed out, but because she realizes she was never meant to shrink inside it. When I finished reading, no one said much, but one woman placed her hand over mine, and I understood she knew. That night, I left my phone on the kitchen counter and let it ring once without checking.